What is the best AI model for coding? That's a really good question, but I think it's the wrong question because I don't think there is a best model for working with LLMs. I think all of them are good enough, and that it is more the systems that you surround them with and the way that you allow it to build its own context that is more valuable and higher ROI than spending a bunch of time going, ooh, I should try Claude, ooh, I should try Gemini, ooh, I need to try OpenAI's new model, and just like jumping around models all the time, because you will never really learn the quirks of a model deeply if you're constantly jumping around. I have spent all of my time in the last 6 months with nothing but Claude Code, and it means that I have a pretty reasonable idea of how it works and the quirks and what it needs and what it doesn't need. So I'll get a little bit into how I do the context engineering for it to allow it to effectively build its picture of the task at hand. And I'll explain the tools that I use for that that you can potentially apply. And these will work with any LLM, any code AI that you want to use. They just help you build effective context, which is probably the most important part, right? Context engineering is a bit more important, I believe, than prompt engineering, because I write pretty simple prompts, but I allow it to gather the right context and I get pretty good fucking results. So the thing you want to use, sequential thought when you need it to break down complex tasks, vibe check when it gets stuck. I have a blog post on that. I'll put that in the description as well. And I'll link all the MCPs that I'm using in the description as well as the plugins for Claude Code, so that you can go have a look and understand what I'm working with. So sequential thought allows the LLM to do a structured bit of thinking, quote unquote. I know it's not real thinking, but it can process through something in a more structured manner, which is genuinely helpful for it. I use vibe check when I notice it getting stuck or in these thought loops to break itself out with a metacognitive check, essentially, from a second LLM. It does like rubber ducking with itself. If you don't have vibe check, you can also just create a command for that essentially does the same thing. It's not an overly complex thing to ask itself metacognitive questions to break itself out of a loop. Then I use ref for it to gather token efficient context. That's ref.tools. That allows it to make semantic search queries and find information on the task at hand and to build context around it in a way that isn't going to bloat it out and confuse it, right? Like if I allow the LLM to gather information and context in its own way, I've noticed it's more likely to be able to do it in a way that is efficient and useful for itself. I could try and give it all the context up front myself, but I noticed that I probably don't do as good of a job as it can do for itself. I don't necessarily know all the information it needs. It probably does. And so I use ref to allow it to gather its own context from online documentation to ensure what I'm doing is best practice or whatever. And then I'll use mgrep, that's something I've introduced very recently. That will allow me to do semantic, like natural language grep searches on the codebase. And allowing Claude to use that improves its token efficiency further, because instead of doing a bunch of greps on random files to try and read code and figure out where it is, we've got a semantic map that allows it to then go, hey, where is the auth code? Or where is the token exchange? Or whatever the fuck, right? Whatever's working, whatever's in the code base, it's able to find that more readily and more easily. And then I use these in combination, and I always make it plan the task carefully first, and I read these plans carefully first. And then this is something I recommend every one of you to do as well if you have these plans. If somewhere in that plan it has ambiguity, do not let it run that plan. Ambiguity is the death of an LLM, because it will try to think. And we all know that an LLM isn't really thinking, so we should not be letting it do that. Claude Code, for what I've noticed, for what it's worth, is incredibly good at following a structured plan. Therefore, I make sure that the plan that it has is complete, thorough, and has no assumptions in it. Then I can let it run, pretty much. But it requires those supporting context building tools in order for it to do a better job. Because I believe that as an engineer, I'm going to be spending more time doing context engineering than prompt engineering. Because you can write a pretty simple prompt, so long as it is able to gather the right context, it can do a really good job. So those are the tools that I use to support myself in that. Obviously, you still want your linting, you still want your type check, you still want your testing. Obra Superpowers is really nice for TDD review and planning as well as execution, because it runs it through in a very structured manner. It asks really good questions when it's doing the brainstorming to help you formulate your idea better and to clarify various details. That helps a lot in making sure that your plan has a lot less ambiguity in it and there's a lot of assumptions answered up front, which then it can use to create an execution plan, because a plan for the idea is different to a plan that's going to execute, and it can do both of those with the Obra Superpowers. It can then use Ref to gather like documentation it needs to validate its assumptions, and then it can use mgrep to find where we have stuff that exists, and it can use semgrep afterwards to validate any security issues. So you see how I'm not actually making the LLM do as much. I'm providing it a lot of supporting tools to allow it to do its job better and more efficiently, and to allow me, in extension to that, to do my job more efficiently. Now, that doesn't mean I trust the LLM. It just means that it can do a better job in augmenting my own ability.